My name is Madison Vale, and the night my brother destroyed my career, he did it with a beer in his hand, a grin on his face, and my boss on speakerphone. I was 32, standing in my parents' backyard in Portland with birthday cake in my hand, when Ethan decided my life would make good entertainment. The rain had stopped less than an hour earlier, so everything still felt damp. The folding chairs, the grass, my sweater sleeves, even the string lights my mother had hung. It should have been harmless. But in my family, harmless usually meant the quiet space before Ethan remembered he had an audience. 2 days earlier, I learned I was shortlisted for a national compliance leadership role at ArdentCare Systems, where I worked in healthcare contract review and vendor risk. It was the kind of role I had earned through late nights, audits, client emergencies, and invisible work. I did not expect my parents to understand every detail, but I wanted one dinner where Lydia looked proud without needing something, and where Grant did not measure my success by how useful it made me. Instead, the evening bent around Ethan. He told loud stories, and my mother laughed too hard at every line. My father sat back with that tired smile he used whenever Ethan crossed a line and called it personality. If Ethan mocked my job, Lydia said he was making the night fun. If I went quiet, everyone acted as if I had chosen distance. I had spent years being called strong in the same tone people use when they mean convenient. Then Ethan picked up his phone. At first, I barely noticed, because he always had his phone out, always recording normal moments into proof that he was the most interesting person in the room. He lifted his beer toward two friends, looked directly at me, and said, "Watch this. Let's see how perfect Madison sounds when she finally says what she really thinks." A few people chuckled. I frowned, still not moving, because my brain was trying to place the voice from his speaker. Then I heard the voicemail greeting. Paula Keene, my supervisor at ArdentCare. I froze before my body understood what to do. Ethan pitched his voice higher, softened the edges like people do when they imitate someone uptight, and started pretending to be me. He slurred just enough to make it sound like I had been drinking, then began joking about Mercy Ridge Medical Center, one of our major hospital clients. He said hospital buyers were easy to pressure when supply delays made them desperate. He laughed about shipments being relabeled if the paperwork looked clean enough. He said procurement directors would sign anything if you dangled the right discount. He made my professional voice sound smug, corrupt, and cruel. And in my line of work, that was not just embarrassing. It sounded like fraud, contract manipulation, contempt toward a hospital client, and possible regulatory exposure. Everyone around him laughed. Lydia covered her mouth, but she was smiling. Grant muttered, "He's just messing around," as if excusing Ethan was a reflex. I lunged for the phone, frosting smearing across my thumb as I reached for his wrist. Ethan stepped back, still laughing, still treating my career like a party trick. I told him to stop, but that only made his friends laugh harder. By the time I got close enough to grab the phone, the message had already been sent. There is a specific kind of silence that happens inside you when your life changes before anyone else in the room realizes it. I looked down at Ethan's screen, then up at his face, and all I could think was that he had not just mocked me. He had used me. He had taken my professionalism, my name, my voice, and turned it into evidence against me. For 1 second, I remembered us as kids, racing bikes after summer storms, Ethan shouting that if anyone ever messed with me, they would have to go through him first. I used to believe him. I thought having a brother meant there was someone who knew your voice well enough to defend it. That night, I learned the person who knows your voice best may also know exactly how to weaponize it. Tell me honestly, if your own brother did that in front of your parents, would you still call it a joke? Because by sunrise, nobody in my family was laughing anymore. But somehow, I was still the one expected to apologize for making it serious. I left early, though Lydia said I was being dramatic, and Grant told me not to ruin my own birthday. Ethan called after me that he would explain if anyone got weird about it, like my career was a spilled drink he could wipe up later. I did not answer. In my car, with frosting still dried near my thumb, I saw my phone. 3 missed calls from Paula, 1 urgent email, 1 voicemail notification from work. I thought the worst part had already happened. I was wrong. The worst part was that my company did not need my truth. They needed proof. I sat in my car outside my apartment for almost a full minute before I called Paula back. The birthday cake frosting was still dried near my thumb, and my sweater carried that strange mix of rain, smoke from the backyard grill, and vanilla from the cake my mother had insisted on cutting before anyone was actually ready. It should have been a normal, slightly disappointing family night. Instead, I was sitting in the dark, staring at 3 missed calls from my supervisor, an urgent email from work, and a tightness in my chest that already knew this was bigger than Ethan wanted to admit. Paula answered on the first ring, and that was when my stomach dropped. Paula Keene was not a warm person, exactly, but she was always controlled. She was sharp, professional, and careful with words, the kind of supervisor who could make a complicated compliance problem feel manageable because panic never entered her voice. But that night, she sounded different. Not loud, not emotional, careful in a way that made me feel like she was already standing a few steps away from me. "Madison," she said, "I need you to tell me right now whether that message was actually from you." I tried to explain before she even finished the question. I said my brother had taken his phone out at my parents' house, that he was drinking, that he thought he was being funny, that I had tried to stop him. I heard myself talking too fast, and the more I tried to sound calm, the guiltier I felt I sounded. Paula did not interrupt me. That somehow made it worse. Then she said, "I'm going to play it for you." Hearing Ethan's fake version of my voice through Paula's phone made me feel physically sick. He had caught just enough of my cadence to be believable, but twisted it into something ugly, arrogant, and reckless. He made me sound drunk without sounding completely incoherent. He made me sound like someone who knew exactly how to pressure a hospital client and thought it was funny. Behind the fake voice, I could hear laughter from my parents' backyard. And that was the part that made my skin crawl, because I knew those laughs. I knew where they came from. I knew my mother had smiled. I knew my father had called it messing around. I had heard people lie about me before. I had never heard someone use my own voice to do it. When the recording ended, Paula let the silence sit for 1 second too long. Then she told me the voicemail had been forwarded by Mercy Ridge Medical Center's procurement director, who believed the message might indicate a serious compliance issue. Mercy Ridge was one of our most sensitive hospital clients, and the things Ethan had said as me did not sound like childish insults. They sounded like admissions. They sounded like contract manipulation, vendor misconduct, shipment relabeling, and contempt for a client responsible for patient care. Paula said Mercy Ridge's legal team had already been notified, and ArdentCare's legal department was reviewing exposure before morning. I told her again that it was Ethan. I told her he had taken the phone out in front of everyone, that I had lunged for it, that he had stepped back, that the message had sent before I could stop him. I offered to send photos from the party, screenshots of where I had been, timestamps, anything that might help show the context. I told her the laughter was not mine. I told her I would call Ethan and make him admit it. I even said I would file a police report if that was what it took. Paula listened, but I could feel the wall going up between us. She did not call me a liar. She did not accuse me directly. But she stopped speaking to me like an employee who had been harmed and started speaking to me like a risk the company needed to contain. "Do not contact Mercy Ridge," she said. "Do not contact anyone connected to the client. HR will speak with you in the morning." After the call ended, I stayed in the car until my hands stopped shaking enough to unlock my apartment door. I remember standing in my kitchen, still holding my phone, thinking Ethan would at least understand now. Maybe he would panic. Maybe he would apologize. Maybe the first message would say, "I messed up. Tell me what to do." Instead, his texts came in one after another. "Relax, I'll explain if it gets serious. You're too uptight. It was funny until you ruined the mood. I almost threw my phone across the room. Not because I was shocked by his selfishness, but because there was a part of me that had still expected him to recognize the difference between embarrassing me and professionally destroying me. Then a colder thought came in behind that one. Maybe he did know the difference. Maybe he knew exactly where to hit, and the only thing surprising him was that the damage had happened faster than he expected. At 6:30 the next morning, HR called. By 8, I was sitting in a conference room across from Paula, an HR director, and a legal counsel I had never met before. On the table between us were a printed transcript of the voicemail, the client escalation email, and an internal risk memo with my name on it. Seeing my name attached to those words made my throat tighten. It was like looking at a crime scene someone had built using pieces of me. I explained everything again. I told them Ethan had always mocked my work because he thought compliance sounded boring until he needed my paycheck to cover one of his emergencies. I told them my family relied on me financially, that Ethan resented me being called stable, that he had been drinking, that the voice was fake, and that I was willing to file a police report or provide any documentation they needed. I said the laughter in the background came from people at my birthday party, not from me. The legal counsel folded his hands and asked the question that broke something in me. Can you prove it was not you before this escalates further with the client? Not explain it, not clarify it, prove it. And I could not. I had no video of the exact moment Ethan made the call, no clean audio from the backyard, no security footage, no witness I trusted to tell the truth without softening it into Ethan was just joking. All I had was my word against a voicemail that sounded close enough to me for a frightened client to believe it. Paula looked down at the packet in front of her, then back at me. Given the client escalation and reputational risk, we are terminating your employment effective immediately. I remember the fluorescent lights above the table, the way HR slid the paperwork toward me, and how calm my own voice sounded when I asked whether years of spotless performance, late nights, recovered accounts, and clean audits meant nothing compared to one malicious call. Nobody answered that part. I carried my box to the parking lot in cold rain with my work badge still in my hand. Halfway to my car, Ethan called. I answered because some part of me wanted him to hear what silence sounded like after you ruined someone. So, he said, did corporate survive my comedy set? You got me fired, I said. There was a pause, then a nervous little laugh. Come on, no way! Yes way. He started swearing, then shifted fast. He said he would fix it, he would talk to them, he would tell them it was a prank. I looked at the badge in my hand and said, you already did enough. That was the morning I learned blood can be the sharpest knife in the room. I drove home from ArdentCare with my work badge in the cup holder and the termination packet on the passenger seat, like it belonged to someone else. Ethan had just told me he would fix it, as if a career could be patched with the same careless confidence he used after denting someone's car or borrowing money he never paid back. I did not answer him again. I could not. There are moments when speaking feels like giving someone another chance to misunderstand you on purpose, and I had no energy left to keep explaining the obvious. My mother called 10 minutes after I got inside. For half a second, I let myself believe she was calling to say she was sorry. I wanted that more than I wanted to admit. I wanted Lydia Vale, the woman who had watched my brother perform my humiliation in her backyard, to sound shaken. I wanted her to say she should have stopped him. I wanted her to say she understood that my life had just been damaged in a way no family dinner could smooth over. But my mother did not call to apologize. She called to manage me. Madison, she said, with that soft, controlled voice she used whenever she wanted to sound reasonable while asking for something unreasonable. Families get through embarrassing misunderstandings. For a moment, I just stood there in my apartment, still wearing the blazer I had put on that morning for the last time. The word embarrassing almost made me laugh. Misunderstanding was worse. A misunderstanding is when someone gets the wrong time for dinner. A misunderstanding is when a text comes across colder than you meant it. A misunderstanding is not your brother pretending to be you, joking about hospital fraud, and getting you fired before breakfast. Mom, I said, did you hear what he said on that voicemail? She sighed. not with grief, but with irritation, as if I was dragging the family through something unpleasant by naming it correctly. I heard him being stupid. I also heard you making it bigger than it needed to be. That was when something inside me went quiet. My mother could turn a knife wound into a manners problem if the person holding the knife was her son. She did not ask how I was going to pay rent if I could not find work quickly. She did not ask whether I needed help. She did not even ask what HR had said. She wanted the emotional temperature lowered because my anger made the family look bad. Then my father called, and somehow Grant made it worse without raising his voice. He had always been calm in the most useless way. Calm when Ethan crossed lines. Calm when Lydia cried to get what she wanted. Calm when I was expected to fix bills that were not mine. Calm in our family did not mean peace. It meant someone else was absorbing the damage. "You know how Ethan is," he said. I had heard that sentence my whole life. When Ethan borrowed money and forgot to pay it back, I knew how Ethan was. When Ethan made jokes at my expense, I knew how Ethan was. When Ethan ruined holidays by picking fights and then laughing first so everyone else would think it was harmless, I knew how Ethan was. But that day, for the first time, I heard the full translation. "You know how Ethan is" really meant, "We know how Ethan is, and we still choose to make you responsible for surviving him." I told my father that Ethan had cost me my job. Grant said ArdentCare should have asked more questions. I told him they had asked questions, and the question was whether I could prove I had not said the things Ethan made my voice say. He went quiet after that, but not the kind of quiet that means someone understands. It was the quiet of a man looking for the safest place to stand. After the calls ended, I sat on my kitchen floor because the chair felt too formal for what my life had become. My blazer was hanging over the back of it, the termination packet still unopened beside me, and my phone kept buzzing with messages I did not want to read. I was not crying anymore. I was counting. Not emotionally at first, literally. The utility bill I covered when Mom said the account was about to be late. The medical copay Grant promised he would reimburse after his next check. Groceries when Lydia said she was embarrassed to ask. Ethan's rent gap that was always just temporary. His car insurance, his emergency cash, his just until Friday loans that somehow never made it to Friday. Every transfer had seemed small enough to excuse at the time because that was how they trained me. They never asked for everything all at once. They took my life in polite little pieces and called it family. Lydia used love like a command. Grant called avoidance peace because it let him benefit without looking like the villain. Ethan treated my stability like an insult, something he could mock until he needed to borrow from it. And I had been the dependable daughter, the family fixer, the low-maintenance one who was expected to be grateful for neglect because I survived it. If they could watch my life catch fire and still call it a misunderstanding, then what exactly had I been paying for all these years? I did not know yet how I was going to fight back. I did not have a plan, a lawyer, or even a clean version of the story anyone outside my family would believe. But I opened my banking app. My hands were steady by then, which almost scared me more than the shaking had. I searched Ethan's name first, then my mother's, then every memo I could remember typing when I still believed helping meant being loved. Before that night, those transfers looked like help. After that night, they looked like an invoice for my own destruction. When the total from the past 18 months appeared, I went completely still. That was the first receipt I saved. It would not be the last. The first week after I got fired was ugly, in a way I did not know how to explain to anyone. Not cinematic ugly, not the kind where you cry once under perfect lighting and wake up ready to rebuild your life with a clean playlist and a brave expression. It was sleep at 4 a.m, coffee at noon, dishes hardening in the sink, unopened emails multiplying like accusations, and job listings left on my laptop for hours while I stared at the same sentence without understanding it. Every time my phone rang, my body reacted before my mind did, because every ringtone felt like another person calling to tell me the fake version of me had already arrived before I could defend myself. This was not movie sadness. It was forgetting to eat, then being too tired to care that you forgot. The strangest part was that I did not just feel unemployed, I felt contaminated. Ethan had put words in my mouth that were not mine, but the world had heard them in a voice close enough to believe. I started wondering if every person who looked at my resume would hear that voicemail before they saw my name. I wondered if Paula had already told people. I wondered if Mercy Ridge had repeated it to someone in another network, who repeated it to someone else until the lie became cleaner than the truth, because lies travel faster when people are uncomfortable. Some nights, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and practiced interview answers like I was rehearsing for a life I might not be allowed back into. Tell me about a time you handled a crisis. I would start, then stop, because the obvious answer was sitting inside me like a bruise. Why did you leave your last employer? I tried to say it without sounding defensive, without sounding broken, without sounding like someone begging a stranger to believe her brother was cruel enough and stupid enough to do something that ridiculous. What are your strengths in compliance risk? That one should have been easy. It used to be easy. But my voice kept coming out smaller than I remembered, and I hated myself for noticing. Ethan had used my voice once, and somehow it made me feel like I had to earn it back. My best friend, Tessa Monroe, was the first person who refused to let me disappear politely. Tessa had known me long enough to understand that when I said I was fine, it usually meant I had organized my pain into something quiet enough not to inconvenience anyone. She showed up with takeout I did not ask for, walked past me like she owned the place, opened the curtains, threw away the coffee cups collecting on my counter, and told me to shower before I argued with her. She did not give speeches about healing. Tessa was practical in the way real loyalty often is. She treated my collapse like something survivable, which mattered because I was not sure I believed that yet. I told her the whole story from the birthday cake to the HR packet, and when I got to the part where Ethan called it a comedy set, her face went still in a way that made me feel less insane. She did not tell me to forgive him because he was family. She did not ask what I had done to upset him. She did not say maybe my company overreacted, although part of me was still trying to make that explanation hurt less. She only said, when everything falls apart, you have two choices: stay buried or get up meaner. I did not become strong in that moment. That is not how it works. I did not leap from the couch, rebuild my resume, and become a woman made of revenge and discipline before sunset. But that sentence stayed with me. It followed me into the shower. It sat beside me when I opened my laptop again. It kept repeating underneath the fear until the fear had to share space with something sharper. The rumors began before I was ready for them. One recruiter stopped replying after a promising first call. A former colleague who used to send me compliance memes suddenly answered with one-word texts. Another recruiter paused too long when I explained the termination, then said, "Your explanation sounds cleaner than the version I heard." That was the first time I understood Ethan had not only cost me my job, he had hijacked the story about who I was. Somewhere, in rooms I could not enter, people were discussing a woman who sounded like me, but was not me, and I had to fight my way back into my own name. So I started building systems because systems were the only language I still trusted. I made a spreadsheet for job applications, recruiter names, follow-up dates, references, and companies with strong ethics departments. I rewrote my resume around outcomes instead of loyalty because loyalty had not protected me. I contacted former clients who had trusted me during messy contract recoveries and asked if they would speak to my integrity. Some said yes immediately. Some sounded careful. Every response taught me something. One evening, Tessa came over again and found two spreadsheets open on my laptop. One was for applications. The other was not. It had names, dates, transfers, amounts, and notes I had copied from old payment memos. She leaned closer, read 3 lines, then looked at me differently. "Madison," she asked, "how long have they been using you like this?" I looked at the numbers, then at the column where Ethan's name appeared again and again. "I think I'm about to find out." The more I looked through the payments, the less they felt like isolated emergencies, and the more they looked like a system I had been trained not to notice. I started with the obvious transfers, the ones with Ethan's name attached, because anger made those easier to face. Rent gap, car repair, temporary loan, insurance help. Each memo sounded harmless by itself, almost reasonable, the kind of thing a sister might do once or twice if her brother was truly in trouble. But then I searched my mother's name, then my father's, then old confirmation emails from utility companies, payment apps, bank alerts, and screenshots I had taken without knowing why I was keeping them. Within hours, my laptop was full of proof I had been calling love by the wrong name. I built categories because categories made the truth harder to soften. Mom household help. Dad medical. Ethan rent emergency. Ethan car repair. Family groceries. Prescription pickup. Temporary loan never repaid. I pulled bank transfers, Venmo payments, Zelle confirmations, texts with soft little guilt hooks, payment requests sent at midnight, and utility receipts with my card number attached. Some of them were small enough that, at the time, I had convinced myself they did not matter. $50 for groceries, $80 for medication, $200 for Ethan's phone bill because he said a missed payment would mess up his job search. But patterns are built out of small things repeated until they become normal. They came to me with emergencies. I started seeing a pattern. What made it worse was that they kept asking even after my life had visibly collapsed. Lydia called 3 days after I was fired and asked if I could still cover part of their electric bill because, as she put it, due dates do not care about personal drama. Personal drama. That was what she called my brother using my voice to trigger a compliance crisis. I did not answer, but I saved the voicemail. Grant texted the next morning, asking if I knew anyone who could help refinance a truck payment, then added that he hated bothering me with everything going on, which apparently did not stop him from bothering me anyway. Ethan waited until 2:13 in the morning to send what I think he believed was an apology. Didn't think it would nuke your life. No period, no real responsibility, just surprise that the damage had reached the size of the act. 2 days later, he sent another message. "Can you spot me $400? I'm tight." I stared at that text for a long time, not because I was tempted to send the money, but because I needed to fully understand the person asking. He had helped cost me my job, mocked my panic, minimized the fallout, and still believed my bank account should open when he knocked. That was when something shifted. I stopped answering. I stopped explaining. I stopped giving them new sentences to twist into evidence that I was dramatic, bitter, unstable, or selfish. I saved everything. For the first time in my life, silence did not feel like surrender. It felt like strategy. At the same time, I had to rebuild the version of myself the industry could understand. I could not walk into interviews and say, "My brother pretended to be me because my family is a machine that turns my competence into fuel." Even if it was true, truth without structure sounds like chaos to people who do not know you. So I learned to say it cleanly. A malicious impersonation created a reputational event at my prior employer. I disputed the assumptions made about me, but I am focused on rebuilding with transparency. I practiced that sentence until it stopped shaking in my mouth. Some people still pulled away. I could hear it in the pauses after I explained. I could feel it in the polite promises to keep my resume on file. But not everyone did. 2 former clients agreed to speak for me immediately. One sent a message that I read at least 10 times. Madison was the person we called when contracts got messy because she did not cut corners. I sat at my kitchen table with that email open and let myself breathe for the first time in days. Ethan had made a fake version of me sound careless and corrupt, but there were still people who remembered the real one. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, a recruiter from Cascadia Regional Health called. I almost did not answer because unknown numbers had started to feel like traps, but something made me pick up. She said Cascadia was building a new vendor integrity division and needed someone who could build systems, calm clients, spot risk early, investigate without panic, and protect the organization before a problem became a scandal. I wrote the words down while she spoke, partly because I did not trust Hope unless it had notes attached. Then she told me the title, Director of Vendor Integrity. I almost laughed. After weeks of being treated like I had no integrity, the universe had a cruel sense of humor. The interview process moved fast, but not easily. There was a screening call, then a technical conversation, then a case exercise that required me to map vendor exposure under pressure. Tessa came over twice that week with coffee and index cards, turning my living room into a fake interview panel. She asked hard questions, interrupted me when I softened my answers, and made me repeat the strongest parts louder. When I said, I think I would probably recommend, she stopped me and said, No, you know what you would recommend. Say it like someone paid you for judgment. She made me practice explaining the ArdentCare situation without apology, without collapsing into too much detail, and without begging invisible people to believe me. By the time the final interview arrived, I had a new rule. I would not plead for trust. I would present facts. I did not know who I would meet in that final room, or whether they had heard the rumor before I arrived. I only knew I was tired of sounding smaller than the damage done to me. Then the interviewer slid a scenario across the table, and as I read it, my pulse steadied instead of spiking. A hospital client had received a message that appeared to come from an internal employee admitting misconduct. Leadership needed a first-day response, and for the first time since my birthday, I knew exactly what to say. The final interview at Cascadia Regional Health was with Marianne Holt, the Chief Operating Officer, and I knew within the first 5 minutes that she was not the kind of executive who performed kindness for comfort. She did not tilt her head and ask how I was holding up. She did not use a soft voice to make the room feel safer than it was. She shook my hand, looked directly at me, and began asking operational questions with the kind of precision that told me she had already read everything I submitted and wanted to know whether the person in front of her could stand behind it. I respected her immediately. There is a difference between someone who wants your pain explained and someone who wants your judgment tested. Marianne did not ask me to retell the worst parts of what happened at ArdentCare so she could decide whether I sounded wounded enough to be believable. She asked about escalation chains, vendor misconduct thresholds, hospital procurement risk, and how I handled client panic without letting fear turn into false certainty. She was calm but not gentle in the decorative way people sometimes use to hide condescension. She was calm because she trusted process. She believed in documentation. She believed that facts had to be handled carefully, especially when reputations, contracts, and patient-facing systems were involved. Then she slid a printed scenario across the table and said, Imagine a hospital client receives a voicemail that appears to come from one of your analysts admitting misconduct. Walk me through your first 24 hours. For 1 second, I felt heat move through my chest. Rage came first, sharp and immediate, because the universe apparently had a sick sense of timing. Then, recognition followed, and behind that, something steadier. Control. I looked down at the scenario, saw the words voicemail, misconduct, client escalation, and internal exposure. And for the first time since my birthday, I did not feel like the woman trapped inside the accusation. I felt like the person who knew exactly how the accusation should have been handled. I started with preservation. Original message, original file, original metadata. No forwarded copies treated as source material unless verified. Then source authentication. What number did it come from? What system carried it? What device logs existed? Who had access? and whether the message could be tied to the alleged speaker by more than assumption. I said we would authenticate the voice if possible, but we would not confuse sounding similar with being proven. We would notify legal and compliance immediately, contain the client's concern without admitting facts not established, and separate allegation from evidence in every internal note. I said the analyst should be protected from retaliation until the facts were verified, because if the message was false or malicious, the employee was not the exposure, the attacker was. Marianne did not interrupt me. That made me keep going. I explained that the first 24 hours mattered because panic creates shortcuts, and shortcuts create liability. You interview relevant parties, preserve communications, map who knew what and when, and document every decision. You do not let a client's fear become your investigation. You do not let leadership's embarrassment become discipline before evidence. You make no assumptions until facts are verified because the fastest answer is not always the true one. When I finished, the room stayed quiet long enough for me to wonder if I had said too much. Then Marianne leaned back slightly and said, "That answer comes from experience." I could have softened it. I could have smiled and said I had handled similar scenarios in theory. But I was done shrinking the truth so other people could digest it. "Yes," I said, "it does." The offer came 3 days later while I was reheating soup I did not want. My phone rang, and when I saw Cascadia's number, I had to set the spoon down because my hand had started to tremble. Marianne's voice was direct, almost matter-of-fact, which somehow made the moment feel more real. "Madison," she said, "we would like you to join Cascadia as Director of Vendor Integrity. Your judgment is exactly what we need." For a second, I could not answer. I leaned against the counter and listened as she explained the compensation, the start date, the reporting structure, and the division they wanted me to build. It was more money than I had ever made, more authority than I had ever been given, and more responsibility than I had ever been trusted with on paper. When I hung up, I laughed once, and then the laugh turned into crying so suddenly I had to sit down on the kitchen floor. I was not healed. I want to be honest about that. A job offer did not erase the voicemail, the termination packet, or my mother calling it a misunderstanding. It did not give me back the version of myself who walked into that birthday dinner still hoping her family might be proud. But it gave me a place to stand. It gave my name a professional future again. Tessa showed up that night with cheap champagne and takeout, and when I opened the door, she looked at my face and said, "You got it." I nodded, and she shouted loud enough that I actually laughed. For a few hours, my apartment did not feel like the place where I had fallen apart. It felt like a place where something had survived. A few days later, Cascadia posted the announcement on LinkedIn. There was my photo, my new title, and a polished paragraph about compliance stabilization, vendor risk leadership, and ethics-based operational review. I stared at my own name longer than I probably should have. After weeks of feeling like a rumor with a resume, my name was attached to competence again. Then my family found it. Lydia left a voicemail from a number I had not blocked yet, her voice sweet enough to make my stomach tighten. "Heard you got good news, honey. We should all have dinner and celebrate like a family." Ethan texted less than 20 minutes later. "Congrats. Knew you'd land somewhere. Proud of you." I stared at the word proud until it stopped looking real. Then another message came through. "Can you help me with rent this month? I'm tight." There was no bridge, straight to the toll. 2 days after the announcement, my doorbell rang. I already knew before I opened it. When I did, all 3 of them were standing there. And they were not looking at me like family. They were looking at me like an account had reopened. When I opened the door, my mother smiled first, and that told me almost everything I needed to know. Lydia Vale had always believed a sweet expression could sand down any sharp edge, especially if the person across from her had been trained to feel guilty for noticing the blade. She stepped into my apartment like she had been invited, carrying no food, no flowers, no apology, only that careful warmth she used when she wanted access without admitting she wanted anything. My father followed behind her, already looking around as if he was trying to decide whether my new title had changed the square footage. Ethan came in last and leaned against my kitchen counter like he still had the right to occupy any room I paid for. For the first few minutes, they performed celebration. Lydia looked me up and down and said, "Director, look at you," dragging the title out like it belonged partly to her. Grant sat on my couch without asking and gave me one of those tired, philosophical nods. "A setback builds character," he said, as though my brother's sabotage had been a motivational exercise arranged for my personal growth. Ethan smiled with the loose confidence of someone who had never had to sit with the full weight of what he had done. "I told people you were too smart to stay down," he said. And I almost laughed because he said it like he had been rooting for me instead of standing at the edge of the hole with a shovel in his hand. They were not proud. They were relieved the machine was working again. I watched them glance around my apartment, and for once I did not pretend not to notice. Lydia's eyes moved to the new work bag by my desk. Grant looked at the framed certificate I had not even hung yet. Ethan opened one of my cabinets without asking, saw nothing interesting, and closed it like my space existed for his inspection. They were not seeing me. They were silently calculating what my life could be worth to them now that Cascadia had put a better title beside my name. Then Grant cleared his throat. "Now that you're settled again," he said, "we need to talk about the family budget." I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because the audacity was almost clean. No transition, no shame, no real apology, not even the courtesy of pretending they had come for me before they came for what I could provide. Just the family budget. As if my paycheck had always been a shared utility and my consent was a clerical detail. Lydia took that as her cue. Household costs were rising. The electric bill was behind. Groceries were getting ridiculous. Grant's medical expenses were not fully covered, and the mortgage had become temporarily complicated, which was Lydia's way of saying they had ignored the problem until it needed my money. Then Ethan shifted on the counter and said some landscaping clients had paid late, so he had a rent shortfall. They did not ask whether I could help. They assumed I would resume helping. Resume. That word landed harder than the numbers. Resume, as if I had paused a subscription. Resume, as if I had been on vacation. Resume, as if Ethan had not detonated my job, as if I had not spent weeks trying to rebuild a professional identity from the wreckage of his joke, as if my new position meant the old arrangement could start again with a better salary attached. I looked at Ethan. "Do you have anything to say before the begging starts?" His face tightened. I said I was sorry. "No," I said. "You said you didn't think it would nuke my life. That is not the same thing." Lydia's smile thinned instantly. "Madison, do not make this about old pain. We are trying to move forward." Old pain? It had been weeks. Not years, not some childhood bruise I had refused to outgrow, but weeks since I had carried a box out of ArdentCare with my badge still in my hand. Weeks since my name became something I had to defend. My mother wanted to move forward because moving forward in our family always meant stepping over what Ethan had broken and asking me to clean up the glass. I stood up and walked to my desk. None of them spoke as I opened the drawer, pulled out the folder, and placed it on the coffee table between us. It was not dramatic. It was just paper. Transfer logs, receipts, screenshots, utility payments, Ethan's unpaid loans, insurance confirmations, bank statements, and a summary sheet showing the total amount I had paid over the last 18 months. The room changed when they saw it. Not because they understood the hurt, but because they recognized the danger of records. "You do not need me," I said. "You need access." Lydia's smile died first. Grant's jaw tightened. Ethan looked irritated, not ashamed, which told me he still thought the problem was that I had written things down. I opened the folder and began reading. I told them how much I had paid toward their utilities, how many times grocery emergencies arrived right before Ethan needed money, how often Grant's medical stress became my financial obligation, and how Ethan had mocked the compliance work that kept funding his rent gaps. I reminded Lydia that she called my termination personal drama and still asked me to cover a bill 3 days later. I reminded Grant that he told me I knew how Ethan was, as if his son's behavior was a weather pattern, and I was unreasonable for wanting shelter. I reminded Ethan that every time he laughed at my boring job, he was laughing at the same stability he kept trying to borrow. "You came here to talk about the family budget," I said. "You did not know I had already audited it." That was when Lydia reached for the folder, but I placed my hand on it before she could touch anything. "Copies," I said. "Everything here has copies." "Here has—" Grant sat back. Ethan stopped leaning on the counter. Then I told them what I had done that morning. I had removed myself from the shared phone plan. I had ended the auto pay attached to their utility account. I had stopped Ethan's insurance bridge payment. I had transferred every shared expense out of my name legally, cleanly, and with written notice. I had also sent certified letters to all three of them. For Lydia and Grant, the letter included a full accounting of voluntary support, formal notice that it was ending, and copies of account transfers so nobody could pretend confusion. For Ethan, there was a civil demand letter for documented loans, along with notice preserving evidence related to the fake voicemail, my termination, and the damages that followed. Lydia's voice dropped to almost nothing. "You got a lawyer?" I looked at her. "You got involved in my career. You made it a grown-up problem." They left faster than they came in. No apology, no hug, no resolution. Just panic dressed up as offended silence. From my window, I watched them reach the mailboxes near the front of the building. Ethan tore his envelope open first, and even from upstairs I could see his posture change. Lydia scanned her pages too quickly, like speed might alter the content. Grant slammed one hand against the mailbox, and for once, the screaming was not happening in my direction. For a few minutes, I let myself believe the letters would be enough to make Ethan stop. I still did not understand my brother. Ethan did not stop when he hit a wall. He looked for another door. For the first 24 hours after the certified letters went out, my phone became a war zone. Lydia called me cruel in a voicemail that sounded more offended than wounded, as if the real betrayal was not what Ethan had done, but the fact that I had finally written it down. Grant sent one long text about gratitude, family loyalty, and how money should never come between blood, which was interesting from a man who had allowed my money to quietly hold parts of his household together for years. Ethan was the loudest at first. His first message was pure anger. "Nobody sues family over a joke. You're making yourself look insane. You think some folder makes you better than us?" I did not respond. By the next morning, his tone had changed. The second voicemail was less rage and more panic. He asked whether we could handle this privately because formal claims could hurt his future opportunities. That was the phrase that stayed with me. His future opportunities. Not my job, not my reputation, not the weeks I had spent trying to scrape my name out from under his fake version of my voice. His opportunities were sacred. Mine had been disposable, so I did what I had taught myself to do. I saved everything. The voicemails, the texts, the timestamps, the blocked number attempts, the sudden switches from threats to guilt. I did not argue because arguing had always been how they pulled me back into their version of the story. This time I let the records speak in a language they could not interrupt. 3 days after the letters, Ethan tried another door. I was still new enough at Cascadia that every meeting felt like a chance to prove they had not made a mistake by hiring me. So when the security lead emailed asking if I had a few minutes, my stomach tightened before I even opened the message. The email said an anonymous caller had contacted Cascadia's main line, claiming to be a concerned member of the community. The caller said I was unstable, vindictive, and dangerous in a leadership position. He said the company should be careful placing me over sensitive vendor reviews because I had a history of retaliating when people did not give me what I wanted. At ArdentCare, a voicemail had turned me into exposure. At Cascadia, a suspicious call became a security concern. That difference mattered before I even heard the recording. The caller was trying to sound formal, almost stiff, like a man reading from a script he thought would make him seem responsible. But I knew him before the recording reached the halfway point. Not by exact voice, because Ethan was careful enough this time to avoid obvious imitation. I knew him by cadence, by the little edge of satisfaction under the concern, by the way he lingered on the word unstable like he wanted it to do more damage than the rest of the sentence. I knew him by the arrogance of believing that changing tone was the same as becoming invisible. He had done it again. Not because he was smart, because he could not help himself. I asked the security lead to preserve the recording, the call log, and the internal route it had taken. Then I requested a meeting with Marianne Holt. My hands were cold when I walked into her office, but my voice did not shake. I told her the whole story without decoration. The birthday voicemail, the termination, my family's financial dependence, the demand letter, Ethan's panic about his opportunities, the anonymous smear call that had just landed at Cascadia's front desk. Marianne listened without interrupting. She did not widen her eyes for drama. She did not ask why my family would do something like that, which was a relief because people always ask that as if cruelty becomes impossible when it shares your last name. She only asked one question. Can you document all of it? I slid the folder across her desk. Already have. She reviewed the timeline, the payment records, Ethan's texts, the demand letter, the ArdentCare termination notes I had saved, and the transcript Cascadia Security had prepared from the smear call. When she finished, she closed the folder and said, "Good, then he does not control the story here." I did not expect that sentence to hit me the way it did. I had thought Ethan's worst damage was the job, the paycheck, the humiliation. But sitting there, I understood that what he had really stolen was the narrative. He had made me sound guilty before I could sound human. He had placed a false version of me in rooms I had not entered yet. Now, for the first time, someone with authority was not asking me why I was inconvenient to protect. She was asking how to stop the person targeting me. Cascadia moved quickly. Ethan's name and photo went to building security. Any future contact attempt would be logged. Legal preserved the smear call as supplemental evidence if I expanded the complaint. Security updated the front desk protocols connected to my department. Nobody treated me like a problem they regretted hiring. They treated Ethan like the threat. That was the first time a workplace looked at the person targeting me instead of asking why I was inconvenient to protect. That same evening, Ethan showed up outside the Cascadia building. He did not make it inside. Security stopped him near the entrance during the late afternoon rush, when enough employees were leaving that he had the audience he always seemed to need. Tessa had come to meet me for coffee, so she saw the whole thing from a few steps away. Ethan spotted me and started waving his arms like volume could still create access. "You think this title makes you better than us?" he shouted. "You think you can destroy your own brother over paperwork?" I stopped far enough away that security stayed between us, but close enough for him to hear me. "You called my old boss pretending to be me. You called my new company pretending to be a stranger. You have done more to destroy me than any enemy ever could." His face changed, not with shame, but with shock that I had said it where other people could hear. I was joking the first time. "No," I said. "You were safe the first time because I had no proof. This time I do." Security moved him back when he stepped forward. He kept talking about family, lawyers, betrayal, and how I had changed now that I had a title. I let him finish nothing. I said the only sentence I needed him to hear. "I am not carrying your consequences for you anymore." As security escorted him away, he turned and threw one last sentence over his shoulder. "Mom said you'd cave eventually." That sentence hurt more than the yelling, because it told me this was never just Ethan. It was the whole system waiting for me to become useful again. After Ethan was escorted away from Cascadia, I expected the next call to come from my mother. That would have made sense. Lydia usually appeared whenever there was damage to reframe, soften, or redirect, but the first message came from my father. And for a long moment I just stared at his name on my screen because Grant Vale almost never stepped into the center of anything. He preferred the edge, the quiet place where he could benefit from Lydia's control without looking like the person holding the leash. His text said, "What did he do this time?" Not "what did you do?" Not "why are you making this worse?" Just that one question, and maybe another version of me would have felt relieved. Maybe she would have mistaken it for protection, but by then, I had learned not to trust the first sentence from anyone who had spent years letting me carry the last consequence. I did not call him. I sent the transcript of the Cascadia smear call, the security summary, and the note showing Ethan had been restricted from the building. Then I waited. Grant went quiet for almost an hour. When he finally replied, his message was shorter than I expected. Your mother did not tell me all of this. I read that sentence 3 times, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed what I had known in my body for years. In our family, information moved only when it protected Ethan. Truth was not hidden because it was unclear, it was hidden because clarity would make the wrong person accountable. Grant admitted in careful language that Ethan was escalating. He said he had thought the original voicemail was stupid and reckless, but not malicious in the way I was describing. He said Lydia had framed the certified letters as me overreacting because I was embarrassed. He said he had not understood the Cascadia call until he saw the transcript. I could almost hear him trying to place himself outside the pattern, as if years of silence had been a misunderstanding instead of a choice. I wrote back, I am not explaining this twice. If you want the truth, read the documents. If you want comfort, call Mom. It felt harsh when I typed it, then it felt honest. A few days later, another unexpected name appeared on my phone, Paula Keene. For a second, I almost did not answer. Paula belonged to the part of my life where truth had failed me, where I had sat across from people who knew my work and still let fear outrun investigation. But I answered because I had stopped being afraid of uncomfortable records. Paula sounded different from the woman who had terminated me. Still careful, but not cold in the same way. Embarrassed, maybe. Not fully apologetic, because people in leadership often approach regret like it might create liability if they hold it too directly. She told me Mercy Ridge Medical Center had reviewed additional details connected to the voicemail, including timing, the phone source, and information that had come through after their legal team asked more questions. The message was now believed to be part of a malicious impersonation, and ArdentCare's handling of my termination was under internal review. I closed my eyes, not because I was relieved exactly, but because my body seemed to recognize that the record was finally turning toward the truth. Paula said she could provide a written statement confirming that I had disputed the voicemail immediately, that I had identified Ethan as the person responsible from the beginning, and that my termination occurred under contested circumstances during a client escalation. She did not ask me to come back. She did not offer some grand apology that would make a good ending. She only offered paper, and paper by then mattered more to me than performance. I accepted the letter. I did not offer emotional forgiveness. I did not tell her it was okay because it was not okay. I did not need Paula to rescue me. I needed the record corrected. The consequences began arriving in pieces after that. Not like lightning, but like mail you cannot stop once it has been sent. Ethan had been applying for a subcontractor opportunity connected to a public healthcare project, the kind of thing he wanted because it sounded official and looked good when he talked about himself. But between the civil demand letter, the harassment reports, the Cascadia security incident, the documented impersonation, and the fact that he had contacted my employer pretending to be a stranger, he was deemed too high risk. He blamed me, of course. People like Ethan always think consequences are something other people create because they cannot bear to see their own hands on the evidence. But I had not called anyone to sabotage him. I had not spread rumors. I had not exaggerated. I simply stopped cleaning the blood off the floor before other people walked in. Ethan thought consequences were something I created. They were actually something he kept signing his name to. Mediation happened 2 weeks later in a neutral legal office with beige walls, bottled water, and no room for family theater. I attended with my attorney. Ethan came with his. Lydia was not allowed to perform wounded motherhood in the corner, and Grant was not there to call silence peace. There was no yelling, no speeches about blood, no childhood memories dragged out like currency, just documents. My attorney laid out the timeline with a calmness that made every fact sound heavier. The birthday voicemail, the client escalation, the HR termination, the family payment history, the demand letter, the Cascadia smear call, the security incident. Paula's statement. Ethan tried the usual doors first. It was a joke. I made it bigger. He panicked. He did not mean for it to go that far. Then, finally, under pressure from his own counsel, he said the closest thing to the truth I had ever heard from him. I did not think she would fight back like this. That sentence told me more than an apology would have. He was not shocked that he hurt me. He was shocked that I documented it. By the end of mediation, Ethan signed a structured repayment agreement for the documented loans, a no-contact provision outside legal channels, a written acknowledgement that he had maliciously impersonated me, an acknowledgement of later harmful contact attempts, and an agreement to stop contacting my employers. Watching him sign did not feel like joy. It felt like release. This was not the revenge people imagine. There was no screaming, no dramatic collapse, no perfect apology, just ink on paper, and somehow that felt stronger. A week later, ArdentCare confirmed that my employment file had been updated. It no longer listed misconduct. The termination was reclassified as a disputed action related to malicious impersonation, and Paula's written statement was included. It did not give me my old job back, and by then I did not want it. But it returned something more important. My name. Then Ethan asked for one final meeting. I almost said no. Then I realized I was not going for him. I was going to say goodbye to the version of me who still wanted him to become my brother. I met Ethan near the Willamette River on a weekday afternoon, in a place public enough to be safe and quiet enough that neither of us could pretend the conversation was about anything else. There were no parents there, no lawyers sitting between us, no audience for him to perform in front of, and no family table where my mother could turn accountability into cruelty against her son. The agreement remained in place. The no-contact provision remained in place. The repayment schedule remained in place. I was not there to renegotiate consequences. I was there because a younger version of me still needed to see him clearly one last time. He looked smaller when he arrived. Not physically exactly, but smaller in the way entitled people look when the room no longer rearranges itself around them. He sat down beside me, careful but uncomfortable, like accountability was a language he had only started learning because someone finally made it expensive not to. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then Ethan cleared his throat and said, "Dad said I should apologize properly." I almost stood up right then. Maybe he saw it on my face, because he looked down and tried again. This time his voice was quieter. He said he hated that everyone called me stable. He hated that Mom and Dad trusted me with emergencies and called him complicated. He hated needing money from someone whose job he thought was boring. And he hated that every time I fixed something, it made him feel more broken. Then he said the part that mattered most. He wanted me to look broken too. That was the first time he gave me something close to honesty. I did not feel the satisfaction I thought I might feel. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired, because suddenly the whole thing was painfully simple. The voicemail had never been just a joke. It had never been one stupid, drunk moment. It was control. If I stayed stable, Ethan had to face himself. If I kept succeeding, he had to live beside proof that chaos was not inevitable. So he tried to make me unstable. He tried to put his shame in my mouth and make the world hear it as mine. Ethan looked at me and asked, "So, what, we're just done?" I thought about every version of him I had carried. The brother who promised to protect me when we were kids. The brother who borrowed money and still mocked the work that earned it. The brother who laughed while my life cracked open. The brother who only became sorry after the receipts reached rooms he could not control. "We were done the night you used my voice against me," I said. "I am only saying it out loud now." He started to argue, then stopped. Maybe because he knew there was nothing left to win. I did not stay until he understood. That was new for me. I used to explain until people either agreed or wore me down. This time, I stood up when I had said enough. The repayment agreement would continue. The no contact terms would continue. Family access would remain closed. I was not asking him to bless my boundary before I kept it. Life after that was not magically easy, but it was honest. Cascadia was hard work, the kind of work that left me exhausted for reasons I respected. My team listened when I spoke. Marianne remained sharp, steady, and generous with trust I had actually earned. Tessa stayed the person who showed up with takeout, blunt truth, and champagne that cost less than dinner. Lydia sent messages through relatives at first, each one dressed as concern and smelling like control. Grant attempted partial apologies, but I did not rush to turn them into trust. Ethan made payments irregularly, but under agreement. The old system did not collapse because they became better people. It collapsed because I stopped participating. If you are the strong one in your family, I hope you hear me clearly. Being able to survive without help does not mean you deserved to. Being quiet does not mean you were fine. Being capable does not mean everyone else gets to use you until there is nothing left. Now, when unknown numbers call, I do not flinch the way I used to. Sometimes I let them ring. Sometimes I watch the screen go dark and feel nothing but space. My voice belongs to me again. My brother took my voice for 30 seconds and almost cost me everything. But in the end, he taught me something I should have learned years earlier. The people who depend on your silence are not entitled to your story. And the moment you start keeping receipts, the truth finally has somewhere to stand.